Jake Martinez sat in the dark control room of the research ship Harmony. The stars outside looked like tiny diamonds scattered across black cloth. He had been working the night shift for 3 weeks now, listening to empty space while the rest of the crew slept. The ship floated quietly in the outer rim of the galaxy, far from Earth and far from any known human colonies. Their job was simple but boring. Listen for signals from space. Record anything interesting. Report back to Earth every month. Most nights, Jake heard nothing but static and the hum of distant stars. Tonight felt different. Jake rubbed his tired eyes and checked the time. 2 in the morning, ship time. He reached for his coffee cup, but stopped when a soft sound came through his headphones. At first, he thought it was just interference from the ship's engines. But as he listened more carefully, his heart began to beat faster. It was music. Not the random beeps and clicks that machines make. Not the strange sounds that come from gas clouds or dying stars. This was real music, played by someone who knew what they were doing. The sound was clear and beautiful, like nothing Jake had ever heard in space before. He turned up the volume and leaned forward in his chair. The music was coming from a violin. Someone was playing a slow, sad song that made Jake think of home and family and Sunday mornings when he was a child. The melody rose and fell like waves on a beach, gentle but powerful. Jake's hands shook as he started recording the signal. His training told him to wake up Captain Steve Johnson right away, but he wanted to listen for just a few more minutes. The music was so beautiful that it made his chest feel tight with emotion he could not name. The song seemed to be some kind of worship music. Jake had heard similar melodies in church when he was young, before he joined the space service. But this version was different. It had layers of sound that seemed impossible for just one violin to make. The notes echoed and blended together in ways that made the hair on his arm stand up. After 10 minutes, the music stopped. Jake sat in silence, staring at his recording equipment. The green lights blinked steadily, showing that everything had been captured. He played the recording. Back once, then twice, then a third time. Each time, the music sounded even more impossible. The signal was coming from Sector 7, a part of space that no human ship had ever visited. According to all their maps and charts, that area was empty. No planets, no stars bright enough to support life, nothing but cold space and cosmic dust. Jake saved the recording and marked it as priority 1. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He played the music one more time, closed his eyes, and let himself remember what it felt like to believe in something bigger than the darkness of space. Hand touched his shoulder. Jake jumped and spun around to see Dr. Lisa Thompson standing behind him. Lisa was the ship's expert on alien life, a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Sorry," Lisa said quietly. "I heard music coming from the comm room. I thought someone was playing Earth radio." Jake shook his head. "It's not from Earth. Listen to this." He played the recording again, watching Lisa's face change as she heard the violin. Lisa's eyes grew wide. "Where is this coming from?" "Sector 7, Jake said. "About 4 light years from here." Lisa was quiet for a long moment, listening to the music. When it ended, she looked at Jake with an expression he had never seen before. It was part excitement, part fear, and part something else. "Jake," she said slowly, "there are no human colonies in Sector 7. Our people have never been there. I know. And this is definitely human music. I can hear the emotional patterns, the way the notes are structured. This isn't how aliens would make music." Jake nodded. "That's what I thought too." Lisa sat down in the chair next to him. "Play it again. I want to listen more carefully." This time, as the violin played its beautiful song, Lisa took notes on her computer. She measured the frequencies, the timing, the way certain notes repeated. When the music ended, she was quiet for several minutes, studying her data. "Jake," she said finally, "this music contains mathematical patterns, complex ones. Look at this." She showed him her screen, where colorful waves showed the shape of the sound. Hidden in the melody were numbers and sequences that looked almost like a code. Someone is trying to communicate, Lisa said. They're using music to send a message. Jake felt a chill run down his back. What kind of message? I'm not sure yet. But look at these patterns here and here. They repeat every few measures, like someone is saying the same thing over and over. Like what? Lisa was quiet again, studying the data. If I had to guess, I'd say they're trying to tell us where they are. And maybe maybe that they need help. Jake and Lisa looked at each other across the dim control room. Outside, the stars continued their silent dance, but now the empty space felt different. Somewhere out there, in a part of the galaxy where no human was supposed to be, someone was playing violin and sending messages wrapped in beautiful music. We need to wake up the captain, Jake said. Lisa nodded. And we need to tell Earth about this. But Jake ... Yeah? What if this changes everything? What if we're not alone out here the way we thought we were? Jake looked at the recording device, still blinking its steady green light. The music had lasted only 10 minutes, but those 10 minutes might have changed the future of the human race. Then I guess we better make sure we're ready for whatever comes next, he said, as if in answer. To his words, the communication system crackled to life again. The violin music returned, even more beautiful than before, floating through the darkness of space like a prayer, looking for someone to hear it. Jake and Lisa sat together in the control room, listening to the impossible music and wondering what they would find when they followed it home. Captain Steve Johnson stood in the ship's meeting room, looking at the star charts spread across the table. 3 days had passed since Jake Martinez first heard the violin music. Now the entire crew of the Harmony was awake and busy preparing for something that had never been done before. Admiral Karen Foster is not happy with us, Steve said to his officers. She wants us to wait for a full fleet before we investigate. She says first contact rules require at least 50 ships and 1,000 scientists. Jake shifted in his chair. Captain, that music is coming from humans. I'm sure of it. If there are people out there, they might need help. Dr. Lisa Thompson nodded and pointed to her computer screen. I've been studying the signal for 3 days now. The mathematical patterns are definitely human. But there's something else mixed in. Something I've never seen before. What do you mean? Steve asked. Lisa played a recording of the violin music. Listen carefully to the background. Behind the violin, there are other sounds. Very quiet, but they're there. The room fell silent as everyone listened. Jake could hear the beautiful violin clearly, but now he noticed something else. Deep underneath the melody, there were low humming sounds that seemed to vibrate through the ship's speakers. Those aren't human sounds, Lisa said. The frequency is too low, too regular. It's almost like machinery, but organic somehow. Steve rubbed his chin. So we have humans playing violin and something else making background noise. That's what it looks like. Steve was quiet for a moment, then looked at his crew. Admiral Foster can order us to wait, but those orders will take 6 days to reach us out here. By then, we could already have answers. Jake smiled. He had served under Captain Johnson for 2 years and knew the man would always choose action over caution when people might be in danger. Set course for Sector 7, Steve said. Best possible speed. The next 2 days passed slowly as the Harmony traveled toward the source of the music. Every few hours, the violin signals would return, always playing the same type of worship songs, always mixed with those strange humming sounds in the background. Lisa worked day and night trying to understand what they were hearing. She had theories, but none of them made complete sense. Jake spent most of his time in the communication room, recording every signal and hoping to hear something new. On the 3rd day, their sensors picked up something impossible. Captain, called out navigation. Officer Ben Clark from the bridge. You need to see this. Steve hurried to the bridge with Jake and Lisa close behind. On the main screen was an image that made everyone stop and stare. There was a planet where no planet should be. It was small and green, with white clouds swirling around it like a marble. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was the structures floating in space around the planet. They looked like giant crystals, each one the size of a city building. The crystals were clear and bright, reflecting the light from a nearby star. They moved slowly in patterns around the planet, like they were dancing. Are those ships? Steve asked. Lisa studied the images carefully. I don't think so. They don't have engines or weapons that I can see. They look more like living things. As the Harmony got closer to the planet, their communication system came alive with signals. The violin music was much stronger now, coming from the planet's surface. But mixed with it were those humming sounds, and now Jake could tell they were coming from the crystal structures in space. Captain, Jake said, his voice shaking with excitement, I'm getting a direct communication signal. Someone is trying to talk to us. Put it on the main speaker, Steve ordered. The bridge filled with the sound of static. Then a human voice came through clearly. It was a man, speaking English with a slight accent that Jake couldn't place. Unknown ship, this is Paul Chin-on. Haven Colony, we see you on our sensors. Please identify yourself and state your intentions. Everyone on the bridge looked at each other in shock. Steve stepped forward to the communication station. Haven Colony, this is Captain Steve Johnson of the Earth Research Vessel Harmony. We received your music transmissions and came to investigate. Are you in need of assistance? There was a long pause. Then the voice returned. This time it sounded emotional, like the man was trying not to cry. Earthship Harmony, this is the most wonderful thing we could have hoped for. We have been waiting so long to hear from home. Please, can you come down to the planet? We have so much to tell you. Steve looked at his crew. Mr. Chun, we show no records of any human colony in this sector. Can you explain how you got here? Another pause. Then a different voice joined the conversation. This one was a woman, speaking with warmth and kindness that reminded Jake of his own mother. Captain Johnson, my name is Grace Chun. My husband Paul and I are part of the lost colony ship New Hope. We've been here for 23 years. Jake's heart jumped. The New Hope had disappeared during humanity's early expansion into space. 300 families had been aboard that ship when it vanished without a trace. Everyone assumed they had died in some accident. Mrs. Chun, Steve said carefully, Earth records show the New Hope as lost with all hands. How many survivors are there? All of us, Captain. All 300 families. We're alive and well, and we're not alone. What do you mean, not alone? A new voice joined the conversation, young and bright. It was a girl, maybe 16 or 17 years old. Captain Johnson, this is Amy Chun. I'm the one who's been playing the violin. We've been trying to contact Earth for years, but our signals were too weak. The Keepers helped us make them stronger. The Keepers? Amy's voice filled with excitement. The crystal beings you can see around our planet, they're our friends. They've been taking care of us since we arrived. They communicate through music and vibrations. That's why I learned to play violin, so I could talk to them. Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. The humming sounds, she whispered. Those are the Keepers communicating. Steve leaned into the microphone. Amy, are you saying you've established peaceful contact with an alien species? Yes, sir. They're wonderful. They taught us so much about science and medicine and how to live in harmony with nature. They've been protecting us all these years. As if to prove Amy's words, the crystal structures around the planet began to glow brighter. The humming sounds grew stronger, creating a harmony with Amy's violin that was beautiful beyond description. Steve looked around at his crew, seeing the same amazement on every face. They had come looking for the source of mysterious music. Instead, they had found the greatest discovery in human history, a lost colony that had survived by making friends with aliens, and a young girl whose violin playing had become the bridge between two completely different forms of life. Haven Colony, Steve said into the microphone, requesting permission to land. We have a lot to learn from each other. Paul Chun's voice came back, warm with joy. Permission granted, Captain. Welcome to Haven. Welcome to humanity's first true home among the stars. Jake Martinez walked through the streets of Haven Colony with his mouth hanging open. After landing on the planet, he had expected to find a small group of survivors living in rough shelters. Instead, he found a beautiful town with clean streets, comfortable houses, and gardens full of flowers he had never seen before. The colonists looked healthy and happy. Children played in parks while their parents worked in shops and offices. Everything was powered by clean energy that came from the crystal structures floating above them. It was like stepping into a dream of what Earth could become. Amy Chun walked beside Jake, carrying her violin case. She was 17 years old with bright eyes and a smile that never seemed to fade. Her parents, Paul and Grace, followed behind with Captain Steve Johnson and Dr. Lisa Thompson. The keepers taught us how to build all this, Amy explained, pointing to a building that seemed to grow out of the ground like a tree. They don't use metal and concrete like we do on Earth. They shape materials using sound vibrations. Sound vibrations? Lisa asked, taking notes on her computer. Amy nodded. Everything has a natural frequency. If you can match that frequency, you can change the shape of almost anything. Watch this. Amy opened her violin case and took out her instrument. She played a few soft notes, and Jake watched in amazement as a small rock near his feet began to change shape. The rough stone became smooth and round, like it was being polished by invisible hands. That's impossible, Jake whispered. Not impossible, said a new voice behind him. Just different. They turned to see a man in his 50s with gray hair and kind eyes. Paul Chun extended his hand to shake Jake's. My daughter has learned things in 23 years that Earth scientists might not discover for another century, Paul said. The keepers see the universe very differently than we do. As they walked through the town center, Jake noticed that many buildings had large crystals built into their walls. The crystals hummed softly, creating a peaceful background music that made everyone feel calm and happy. The crystals help us communicate with the keepers, Grace Chun explained. She was a woman in her late 40s with gentle hands and a voice. That reminded Jake of his grandmother. At first, we couldn't understand each other at all. The keepers don't use words like we do. They speak through harmonics and frequencies. Amy was just a baby when we arrived, Paul added. She grew up, hearing their music every day. By the time she was 5, she could understand them better than any adult. Amy blushed. It's not that hard once you learn to listen with your heart, instead of just your ears. Captain Steve Johnson had been quiet during the tour, but now he stopped walking and looked serious. This is all wonderful, but I need to ask you something important. Have you ever encountered any hostile aliens? Any species that might be dangerous? Paul and Grace exchanged worried looks. Amy's smile faded for the first time since they had met her. Why do you ask? Paul said carefully. Earth has been monitoring deep space for years. We've picked up signals that suggest there might be unfriendly civilizations out there. I need to know if Haven is safe. Amy looked up at the crystal structures floating above them. The keepers seemed to sense her concern because their humming grew louder and more urgent. There is something, Amy said quietly. The keepers have been worried about it for months. They call them the Silence Makers. The Silence Makers? Jake asked. Grace nodded. According to the keepers, they're a species that destroys everything they find. They don't want to conquer or steal resources. They just want to make everything quiet and empty. Lisa looked up from her notes. You mean they kill other species? Worse than that, Paul said. They erase them completely. Planets, stars, entire solar systems. The keepers say that wherever the Silence Makers go, nothing is left behind. Not even empty space. Just nothing. Jake felt a cold chill run down his back. Have the keepers ever fought them? Amy shook her head. The keepers are peaceful. They've never hurt anyone in their entire history. They don't even know how to fight. That's why they've been so scared. Captain. Johnson frowned. How close are these silence makers? Amy looked up at the crystals again, and Jake could hear their humming change to a more worried tone. Amy listened carefully, then turned back to the humans with fear in her eyes. The keepers say they detected them 2 days ago. They're coming. This way, and they'll be here in less than a week. The group stood in silence, looking up at the beautiful crystal beings that had protected Haven Colony for over 20 years. Jake realized that these peaceful aliens had never faced anything like the silence makers before. How many ships are coming? Steve asked. Amy played a few notes on her violin, communicating with the keepers. Their response made her face turn. Pale, not ships, she said. The keepers don't think the silence makers use ships like we do. They are more like a wave of destruction that moves through space. The keepers estimate there are thousands of them. Paul put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Captain Johnson, is there any way Earth could send help? We have 300 people here, plus all the keepers. We can't fight something like this alone. Steve was quiet for a moment, thinking. It would take months for Earth to send the fleet, even if they believed our report. We're on our own. Jake looked around at the peaceful town, the happy families, the children playing in the gardens. In less than a week, all this could be gone forever. The silence makers would erase Haven Colony and the keepers like they had never existed. There has to be something we can do, Jake said. The keepers have advanced technology. They can shape matter with sound. Surely they can defend themselves. Amy shook her head sadly. They've tried running away from the silence makers before. It doesn't work. The silence makers always find them. The keepers think this is the end. Grace Chun looked at her daughter with pride and determination. Amy, you've spent your whole life learning to communicate with the keepers. You understand them better than anyone. What do you think we should do? Amy was quiet for a long moment, holding her violin and listening to the worried humming of the crystals above. When she finally spoke, her voice was strong and clear. The keepers have never learned to fight because they never had to. But we humans know how to fight. We know how to survive when everything seems hopeless. And I know how to translate between our species. She looked up at her parents, then at Jake and the other Earth visitors. Maybe it's time for the keepers to learn something new from us. Maybe it's time for them to learn that sometimes, to protect the things you love, you have to be willing to make noise instead of staying quiet. Jake felt a spark of hope. Amy was right. Humans had survived wars, disasters, and impossible odds throughout their history. If they could teach the keepers to fight, maybe they could save Haven Colony and stop the silence makers from destroying anyone else. The question was, could they do it in less than a week? The meeting hall in Haven Colony was packed with people. Human colonists sat next to floating crystal formations, creating the strangest gathering Jake Martinez had ever seen. Amy Chun stood at the front of the room with her violin, translating. Between the two species, as they tried to figure out how to survive the coming attack. Paul Chun had spent the morning showing Captain Steve Johnson and Dr. Lisa Thompson through the colony's hidden workshops. What they found there changed everything. Jake thought he knew about the lost colonists. We haven't just been surviving here, Paul explained as he led them to a laboratory that looked like something from a science fiction movie. The keepers taught us to combine human creativity with their technology. We've been building things that neither species could create alone. The workshop was filled with devices that seemed to grow rather than be built. Computers made of living crystal sat next to machines that hummed with the same frequency as the keepers. Everything was powered by harmonic energy that came from the floating beings above the planet. This is incredible, Lisa said, examining a medical scanner that could heal injuries using sound waves. Earth scientists would need 100 years to understand how this works. Steve picked up what looked like a simple metal rod, but when he held it, the device began to glow and vibrate. What does this do? Paul smiled. Amy calls it a harmony tool. It can reshape matter by matching the natural frequency of any material. Watch. Paul took the rod and pointed at a piece of broken metal on the workbench. He hummed a low note, and the rod began to glow brighter. The broken metal slowly reformed itself into a perfect sphere. The keepers don't think in terms of weapons, Paul continued, but we humans do. We've been quietly working on ways to use their technology for defense. We just never thought we'd need it. Jake's eyes widened as he understood what Paul was saying. You've been building weapons? Not weapons. Exactly, Paul said. More like tools that could become weapons if we needed them to. The keepers know about our work, but they don't really understand what fighting means. They've never had to defend themselves before. Back in the meeting hall, Amy was having a difficult conversation with the keepers. The crystal beings floated. Around her, their humming filled with worry and confusion. Amy played gentle melodies on her violin, trying to explain concepts that the keepers had never encountered. They don't understand why anyone would want to destroy things, Amy told the gathered humans. The keepers have spent millions of years creating and growing and making things beautiful. The idea of something that only destroys is completely foreign to them. Grace Chun stood up from her seat. Amy, can you ask them if they will be willing to learn? Not to become violent, but to protect themselves and others. Amy played a complex melody that seemed to ask a question. The keepers responded with harmonics that made the air in the room vibrate. Amy listened carefully, then nodded. They say they will try to learn, but only if it means protecting life instead of destroying it. They want to know what humans think. They should do. Captain Johnson stepped forward. Tell them we need to combine our knowledge. Human tactical thinking with their advanced technology. We can't run from the silence makers, so we have to find a way to stop them. As Amy translated, Jake noticed that more crystal formations were appearing around the colony. Word had spread through the Keeper network, and beings from all across the solar system were coming to Haven. The sky above the planet was now filled with floating crystals, each one singing its own part in a massive harmony. There are thousands of them, Jake said in amazement. I had no idea there were so many keepers in this system. Lisa was taking notes as fast as she could. Each crystal formation seems to be an individual keeper, but they're all connected somehow. They share information instantly across vast distances. Amy overheard them and smiled. That's how they helped us contact Earth. One keeper alone couldn't send a signal that far, but when they all work together, they can reach anywhere in the galaxy. An idea began to form in Jake's mind. Amy, if the keepers can communicate across the galaxy, can they contact other species? Other civilizations that might have survived attacks from the silence makers? Amy's eyes lit up. She played a rapid series of notes on her violin, and the keepers around her began to hum with excitement. They say yes, Amy said. They've been in contact with survivors from dozens of worlds. Most of them are hiding in places like this, protected by peaceful species like the keepers. But none of them have ever fought back? Steve asked. Amy shook her head. The keepers say that every species that tried to fight the silence makers was completely destroyed. That's why everyone just hides and hopes they won't be found. Jake felt a surge of determination. Then it's time for something new. It's time for all these species to work together instead of hiding separately. Grace Chun looked at Jake with interest. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that humans have one thing that no other species seems to have. We know how to bring different groups together to fight for a common cause. We've been doing it on Earth for thousands of years. Paul nodded slowly. The keepers have the technology to communicate with all these hidden civilizations instantly. If we could convince them to work together, we'd have an army, Steve finished. Not just one species trying to fight alone, but dozens of civilizations, all working as one. Amy was translating as fast as she could, and the humming from the keepers grew louder and more excited. Other colonists in the meeting hall began to smile as they understood what was being proposed. The keepers think it might work, Amy said. They say there are over 50 different species hiding in this part of the galaxy. Each one has unique abilities that could help in a fight. Lisa looked up from her notes. But how do we coordinate? An attack with so many different species? They all think differently, move differently, fight differently. Amy held up her violin. The same way I've been communicating with the keepers for 17 years. Through music. Sound and harmony are universal languages. Every species understands rhythm and melody, even if they express it differently. Jake smiled as he realized what Amy was suggesting. You want to conduct a galactic orchestra of different species, all working together to stop the silence makers. Not just me, Amy said. All of us. Humans understand leadership and cooperation. The keepers understand harmony and connection. Together, we can teach these other species how to fight as one. Captain Johnson stood up and looked around the room at the mixture of humans and crystal beings. How long do we have? Amy consulted with the keepers, then looked back at the group with determination in her eyes. 4 days until the silence makers arrive. But if we can get messages out to all the hidden civilizations in the next few hours, we might have enough time to organize. Something that's never been tried before. Paul Chum put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. A galactic alliance led by a teenage girl with a violin and a colony of humans who learned to make friends with aliens. Grace Chun smiled. It sounds impossible. Jake grinned. Then it's exactly the kind of thing humans are good at. Amy Chun stood on the highest tower in Haven Colony, her violin ready in her hands. Around her, the sky was filled with more crystal formations than Jake Martinez had ever imagined possible. The keepers had been calling to their friends across the galaxy for 3 days, and now representatives from dozens of different species were arriving in the Haven system. Jake watched from the ground as strange ships appeared near the planet. Some looked like giant flowers made of metal. Others moved like schools of fish swimming through space. A few were so strange that Jake couldn't even guess what they were supposed to be. I count 47 different species so far, Dr. Lisa Thompson said, looking through her telescope. Each one is completely different from the others. Captain Steve Johnson stood nearby, watching his communication officers try to make sense of all the signals coming from the alien ships. How are we supposed to coordinate a battle with so many different types of beings? They probably can't even understand each other. That's where Amy comes in, said Paul Chun. He was watching his daughter with pride and worry mixed together. On his face, she's going to try something that's never been done before. Grace Chun joined her husband, holding his hand tightly. Our little girl is about to become the conductor of the strangest orchestra in the galaxy. Amy took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes of her violin rose into the air, clear and beautiful. The melody was simple at first, just a basic rhythm that any creature could follow. But as she played, the music became more complex. Keepers responded first, their crystal formations glowing and humming in harmony with Amy's violin. Then, one by one, the alien ships began to join in. The flower-shaped vessels created sounds like wind chimes. The fish-like ships sang with voices that sounded like whales from Earth's oceans. Each species added their own unique voice to Amy's growing symphony. Jake felt his heart race as he listened to the impossible music filling space around Haven. Dozens of completely different species, each one adding their own sounds to create something beautiful and unified. She's teaching them to work together, Jake whispered in amazement. The music continued for an hour, with Amy guiding the alien orchestra through increasingly complex harmonies. By the end, all 47 species were playing together like they had been practicing for years. When the music stopped, Amy lowered her violin and spoke into her communication device. This is Amy Chun to all allied species. Can everyone understand the rhythm patterns we just practiced? Responses came back in dozens of different languages, but the meaning was clear. Every species had learned Amy's musical language. Good, Amy said. Now we need to talk about the silence makers. They'll be here in 18 hours. The keepers began to hum with information about the approaching enemy. Amy translated their words into musical patterns that all the allied species could understand. The silence makers travel in a wave formation, Amy explained. They don't use ships like we do. They are the ships. Each silence maker is about the size of a small moon, and they move together like a storm front. Jake shuddered as he imagined. Creatures the size of moons coming to destroy everything in their path. How many are coming? Captain Johnson asked. Amy consulted with the keepers, then played a slow, heavy melody that made everyone listening feel afraid. Over 3,000 of them. They'll arrive as one massive group, moving faster than any normal ship. Lisa looked up from her calculations. Even with all these allied species, we're outnumbered about 60 to 1. But we have something they don't, said a new voice. Everyone turned to see Commander Ben Clark from the Harmony approaching with a group of human colonists. We have Amy's music, and we have a plan. Paul Chun smiled at the Earth officer. What kind of plan? Ben pointed to the alien ships surrounding Haven. Each species here has unique abilities. The flower ships can create energy barriers. The fish-like beings can move faster than anything we've ever seen. The crystal creatures from the outer rim can become invisible to sensors. But none of them have ever worked together before, Grace pointed out. That's where humans come in, Jake said, understanding what Ben was suggesting. We're good at tactical thinking. We know how to use different strengths together to win fights we can't win alone. Amy nodded excitedly. And I can coordinate everyone through the music. Each species will know exactly when to attack, when to defend, and when to move. The next 16 hours were the busiest of Jake's life. Human colonists worked with alien representatives to plan the most complex battle in galactic history. Amy spent the time creating musical signals for every possible situation. Attack patterns, retreat orders, formation changes, everything was turned into melodies that all species could understand and follow. The Keepers used their technology to share detailed battle plans instantly across the entire fleet. Species that had been hiding and running for generations began to learn how to fight back. The key is coordination, Captain Johnson explained to a group of ship commanders from different worlds. The silence makers are powerful, but they've never faced organized resistance before. They expect their enemies to panic and scatter. Instead, we're going to do something they've never seen, Amy added. We're going to work together like one giant organism, each species playing their part, in a symphony of survival. As the 18-hour deadline approached, Amy took her position on the tower again. The Allied fleet spread out around Haven in a formation that looked like a massive flower, with the Keeper's crystal formations at the center, and the various alien ships forming petals around them. Jake stood at his communication post, ready to relay Amy's musical commands to ships across the system. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. All ships report ready. He called out to Amy. Amy lifted her violin and looked out at the stars. In the distance, space itself seemed to be getting darker as the silence makers approached. Here they come, Lisa said, watching her sensors. 3,012 individual contacts. They're moving in perfect formation, just like the Keepers predicted. The silence makers appeared on the horizon like a wall of darkness moving toward Haven. Each one was enormous, bigger than the largest cities on Earth. They moved without ships or engines, somehow propelling themselves through space by sheer will. Amy raised her violin to her chin and looked down at Jake. Tell Earth that humans tried something impossible today. Tell them we brought the galaxy together to fight for what we believe in. Tell them yourself when this is over, Jake replied. Amy smiled and began to play the opening notes of the battle. Symphony. The music rang out across space, and 47 different species prepared to make their stand against an enemy that had never been defeated. The battle for Haven was about to begin. Amy Chun's violin sang across the darkness of space as 3,000 silence makers swept toward Haven like a wave of destruction. Jake Martinez watched from his communication post as the enemy grew larger and larger on their screens. Each silence maker was the size of a small moon, dark and terrible, moving without any visible means of propulsion. They're beautiful in a horrible way, Dr. Lisa Thompson whispered, studying the approaching creatures through her telescope, like living shadows that decided to swallow the stars. The Allied fleet waited in perfect formation around Haven 47. Different species holding their positions as Amy's music guided them. The flower ships from the Centauri system glowed with soft blue light. The fish-like vessels from the outer rings moved in graceful patterns. The crystal formations of the keepers hummed with harmonious energy. At the center of it all, Captain Steve Johnson stood on the bridge of the Harmony, watching the greatest battle in galactic history about to unfold. All ships report ready, Amy. It's time. Amy took a deep breath and changed her melody. The new music was strong and determined, like a marching song that gave courage to everyone who heard it. This was the signal for the first phase of their plan. The fastest ships in the Allied fleet shot forward toward the Silence Makers. The fish-like beings moved like lightning, zipping around the giant creatures and making them turn to follow. This broke up the perfect formation that the Silence Makers had been using. "It's working," Jake called out as he watched the enemy formation scatter. The Silence Makers are trying to catch the fast ships, but they can't keep up. Amy played a new sequence of notes, and the flower ships responded by creating massive energy barriers in space. The barriers looked like walls of light stretching between the stars. The Silence Makers crashed into these barriers and stopped, confused by something they had never encountered before. "Phase 2, Paul Chun said proudly, watching his daughter conduct the battle like a symphony. Now comes the tricky part. Amy's music became more complex, with multiple melodies playing at the same time. Different groups of ships began to execute coordinated attacks. The crystal creatures from the outer rim disappeared from all sensors, becoming invisible as they moved behind the Silence Makers. Rock-throwing ships from the mountain worlds launched massive stones that exploded like fireworks when they hit their targets. For the first time in their existence, the Silence Makers faced organized resistance. They tried to reform their wave attack, but every time they gathered together, Amy's music directed another coordinated strike that forced them to scatter again. "They don't know how to fight an enemy that works together," Captain Johnson observed. "They're used to civilizations that panic and run in different directions." But the Silence Makers were learning. After an hour of battle, they began to adapt to the Allied tactics. They stopped trying to maintain formation and instead broke into smaller groups that could move independently. "Amy, they're changing their strategy," Jake warned. Amy nodded and played a series of urgent notes. The Allied fleet immediately shifted into a new formation, with the stronger ships protecting the weaker ones. But now the battle became much more dangerous. Several of the flower ships took heavy damage as groups of Silence Makers focused their attacks. One of the fish-like vessels was completely destroyed, its beautiful songs cut short forever. The crystal creatures tried to maintain their barriers, but they were weakening under the constant assault. "We're losing ships," Lisa reported grimly. "At this rate, we won't last another hour." Amy's music faltered for a moment as she saw friends and allies being destroyed around her. Grace Chung climbed up to the tower and put her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Remember why we're fighting," Grace said gently. "Remember all the worlds these creatures have destroyed. Remember all the families they've silenced forever." Amy wiped tears from her eyes and lifted her violin again. This time, the melody she played was different from anything she had ever created before. It wasn't just her own music anymore. It was the combined voices of every species in the Allied fleet, all their hopes and dreams and determination woven together into one powerful song. The music spread through space like a wave of light. Every ship in the Allied fleet began to glow as the different species responded to Amy's call for unity. The Keeper's crystals blazed like stars. The flower ships bloomed with new energy. The fish-like beings sang with voices that could be heard. Across the entire system, something incredible happened. The Allied fleet stopped fighting as separate groups and became one massive organism. Every ship moved in perfect harmony with every other ship. Attacks were coordinated with impossible precision. Defenses appeared exactly where they were needed. The Silence Makers had never faced anything like this. They tried to destroy individual ships, but the moment one vessel was in danger, dozens of others came to its defense. They tried to break through the Ally formation, but every gap they created was immediately filled. Jake watched in amazement as the tide of battle turned. "They're retreating," he called out. "The silence makers are actually pulling back." But Amy didn't stop playing. Her music grew louder and more insistent, and the Allied fleet pressed their advantage. For the first time in their long history of destruction, the silence makers found themselves being driven away from their target. One by one, the massive creatures began to flee into deep space. They had never been defeated before, and they didn't know how to handle the experience. The Allied fleet pursued them, making sure they left the system completely. When the last silence maker disappeared into the darkness between stars, Amy finally lowered her violin. The Allied fleet hung in space around Haven, victorious but exhausted. "We did it," Jake whispered, hardly believing what he had just witnessed. "We actually did it." Captain Johnson activated the fleet-wide communication system. "This is Captain Steve Johnson to all Allied ships. Today we have accomplished something that no single species could have done alone. We have shown the galaxy that unity is stronger than destruction, that hope is more powerful than fear." Amy picked up her violin one more time and began to play Amazing Grace, the song that had started everything. One by one, every species in the fleet joined in with their own voices, creating a harmony that filled the space around Haven with music more beautiful than anything the galaxy had ever heard. Paul and Grace Chun climbed to the tower and hugged their daughter tightly. "You saved us all," Paul said. Amy shook her head. "We saved each other. That's what humans do best. We bring people together when things seem impossible." Jake looked up at the stars, knowing that this day would be remembered forever. A teenage girl with a violin had taught the galaxy that Amazing Grace could triumph over any darkness, and that the power of unity could overcome even the greatest evil. The music of hope echoed across the stars, promising a new age of cooperation and peace.